They mocked the 81-year-old veteran at the bus stop until a former Marine colonel pulled over. The morning sun filtered weakly through the grey clouds, casting long shadows over the cracked sidewalk. Walt Jennings sat on the splintered wooden bench at the corner of 5th and Monroe, his duffel bag at his feet, the fabric worn thin in places where time had pulled at the seams. He shifted slightly, knees stiff, back straight, not out of vanity, but habit. Old habits didn't die, they just slowed with age. His cap, deep navy once but now sun-bleached and threadbare, rested on his head like a second skin. The words U.S. Navy, Vietnam veteran, barely showed anymore. The stitching dulled by time and weather, his jacket, patched at the elbows, held the scent of pipe smoke and pine oil, leftovers from a simpler life lived with purpose. The city moved around him, fast and distracted. Cars passed without notice. A mother tugged her child across the street. No one glanced twice at the man waiting for bus 42. That was fine with Walt. Being overlooked had its advantages. People left you alone when they thought you were nobody. Behind him, the metal shelter groaned in the breeze. Trash rolled lazily across the pavement. A group of teenagers sauntered out of the corner store nearby, soda bottles in hand, eyes scanning for amusement. One of them, no older than 17, pointed at Walt and laughed. "Look at Gramps, waiting for a ride to the nursing home." Walt didn't flinch. He kept his eyes on the road. Another teen chimed in. "What's in the bag, old man? Oxygen tank or adult diapers?" The group erupted into laughter. Walt said nothing. He'd been talked down to before, by green officers who thought they knew war, by politicians who never set foot outside a press room. He had survived more than words. He'd survived Da Nang in '69. He'd held a dying boy's hand through the night. Mockery didn't even register. Still, one of them edged closer. He snapped a picture. "This one's gonna blow up on TikTok. War relic." The others howled. Walt exhaled slowly, his gaze never leaving the far corner of the street. He didn't need to look at them to know their kind. Loud, unsure of themselves, desperate to be seen. He pitied them more than anything. They thought they were strong because they had numbers, because no one had ever made them be quiet long enough to learn what strength actually looked like. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the faded American flag patch sewn onto Walt's duffel. One corner was torn. He adjusted his cap and waited. They stood just down the sidewalk, 5 of them, maybe 6. Backs leaned against the brick wall of the liquor store, phones in hand, energy twitching in their limbs like they couldn't sit still even if they tried. They'd seen him before, most likely. Everyone had in passing. But this time, one noticed the slow walk, the stiff legs, the old man lowering himself onto the bench with the careful precision of someone who didn't trust gravity anymore. "Yo, there he is again," one of them muttered, gesturing with his bottle of grape soda. "Looks like the guy from that war movie we watched in history class, minus the cool." Another teen laughed, loud and sudden, startling a pigeon nearby. "Dude's rocking 3 layers of goodwill and a beard that belongs in a museum. Think he even knows what year it is." They turned their phones toward him. A few zoomed in. "He's got that haunted hobo vibe," said one girl, half laughing as she mimicked Walt's stiff movements. "Bet he tells squirrels war stories." "Probably still waiting for a bus to 1965, one of the boys added, drawing more laughter from the group. They didn't whisper. They didn't care if he heard. Walt sat still, didn't flinch, didn't look up. He'd heard worse. In jungles where insults came in a language he didn't speak. In hallways where young doctors with soft hands had called him non-compliant. Words had never broken his skin, but still, it chipped at something. Not anger, not quite sadness either. Just a quiet erosion, like rain on old stone. One of the teens stepped closer, holding his phone high, filming. "Say cheese, Gramps," he called out. "Smile if you fought in the dinosaur wars." No response. He zoomed in tighter. Another voice behind him snorted. You think he's homeless? Walt blinked slowly. The duffel at his feet bore two patches, one from a long disbanded SEAL team, another faded and indecipherable to most eyes. They didn't ask what it meant. They didn't know enough to ask. A passing couple slowed, noticed the commotion, then kept walking. Eyes down, everyone saw. No one stopped. Damn. This'll get views, the teen filming muttered, chuckling as he took a slow pan of Walty, from the beat-up sneakers to the sun-creased face beneath the cap. Might even go viral. Walt kept his hands folded, resting lightly on his knees. No shaking, no fear, just silence. He wasn't waiting for the bus anymore. He was waiting for the world to remember what respect looked like. A crumpled fast food wrapper tumbled down the street, caught in the morning wind. It brushed past Walt's boots and came to rest near the curb. He didn't move to kick it away. He sat as he had for the past 40 minutes, quiet, still, waiting. The bus was late. It always was. "Yo, Gramps!" one of the boys shouted now, louder, braver with each chuckle from his friends. "What's in the bag, old bones?" The others broke into laughter, the kind of laughter that feeds on itself, careless, wild, sharp-edged. One of them raised his phone again, angling it for a close-up. "Get this, say something, old-timer. You ever use FaceTime? Or were you more of a, what's it called, Telegram kind of guy?" Walt didn't speak. His eyes remained forward, his body motionless except for the slow, steady rise of his chest. He could hear everything. The comments, the snickering, the muffled laughter of a teenage girl who covered her mouth but didn't look away. "Yo, hold up." The teen filming took a few steps closer. "Let's do a TikTok. You be the grumpy grandpa. Just sit there, okay? Pretend we're storming the beach at, what was it? Normandy." Wrong war. But Walt didn't correct him. From across the street, a man in a suit glanced over. He slowed his pace, eyebrows knitting together. Then, as though remembering an appointment, he turned away and kept walking. A woman pushing a stroller looked up from her phone, saw the crowd, and crossed to the other side. No one said anything. No one stopped. "Guys, look at his bag," the girl called out. "It's like falling apart. Is that duct tape on it?" They all leaned in to laugh, pointing, one filming in landscape now. They narrated their mockery like sports commentators. And here we see the ancient American veteran in his natural habitat, clutching his sacred relic, probably filled with coupons and broken dreams. Laughter exploded again. Walt blinked once. Slowly. He remembered laughter like that. Heard it behind enemy lines once, too loud from a careless young Marine who didn't make it through the next morning. Sound carried. It always carried. One of the boys dropped onto the bench beside him. Far too close. "Hey, seriously, you okay? You look like you just came from a Civil War reenactment, or the real thing." He laughed at his own joke, elbowing Walt lightly. Walt didn't move. His fingers, resting against the faded canvas of the duffel, curled slightly, then released. His expression never changed. He had waited in the cold for helicopters that never came, waded through jungles that swallowed men whole. He could sit through this. Another teen stepped forward, phone still up. Let's get his reaction. This is gold. They leaned in. Walt said nothing, and that silence began to feel heavier than all their noise. He didn't speak. Not when the boy called him Gramps again, not when another kicked an empty soda can near his boots, not when the laughter rose and fell like waves on a shore long eroded by indifference. Walt Jennings sat with the same posture he had learned at 19, back straight, shoulders low, eyes forward. Stillness wasn't surrender, it was discipline. The horizon shimmered faintly, heat already lifting off the asphalt, though it was barely past 8. He focused on that, on the thin line where the road disappeared. He had once watched for helicopters the same way, eyes tracing the sky for a black blur that meant safety or orders, or both. The boy next to him laughed again, louder now. "What, cat got your tongues, old man?" Walt gripped the handle of the duffel bag a little tighter. The canvas scratched against his fingers, and he welcomed the feel of it, the frayed threads, the familiar wear of stitched-on patches, one almost gone entirely. He didn't need to look. He knew exactly where they were. He had carried this bag through more than these kids could imagine, through monsoon rains and sniper fire, through loss, through silence. A bottle rolled into the gutter. A girl filmed him from across the sidewalk, narrating, still not talking, like some kind of statue or ghost or something. Creepy. He didn't blink, didn't flinch. Let them cast their words like stones. Let them think silence was weakness. The world had been shouting at him since he came home. A wind tugged at the hem of his coat. He let it. The cold didn't bother him anymore, not since Korea. Or maybe it was just age. Either way, he didn't shiver. He thought of Clara then, her gentle laugh, how she used to meet him at the station, right after deployments, even when he didn't tell her when he'd be back. I just knew, she used to say. She'd been gone 6 years now, cancer, quiet as a whisper, gone before he could say half of what he should have. More laughter, louder this time, a mock salute. 10 Hut, soldier. Where's your walker, sir? He exhaled through his nose. No anger, no rise, just the breeze, the waiting, the same sun that had watched him for 81 years. One of the boys scoffed. Man, he's not even fun. Just sits there like a rock. They turned their backs eventually, moved on to someone louder, someone who'd fight back, give them the show they wanted. Walt didn't move. The duffel bag rested beside him like a sleeping dog. Inside, it held a photo. 3 men, one missing his arm, one already dead, and a folded letter signed by a president none of these kids could name. He sat alone again, still watching the road. The cicadas were deafening. That's what he remembered first. Not the gunfire, not the rain, just the high-pitched, relentless drone of insects in a jungle that felt alive and angry. The air was thick enough to chew, every breath laced with rot and humidity. Leaves the size of helmets brushed against his sweat-soaked uniform as he crouched beneath the foliage, rifle tight against his chest. It had been 48 hours since they lost radio contact. They were supposed to be recon, in and out. But the map didn't tell them about the ravine, or the snipers, or the fact that the enemy had set up camp 3 clicks deeper than anyone expected. There were 7 of them to start. By sunset, there were 4. He still saw Jimmy's face sometimes, just 19. Georgia accent so thick you had to ask him to repeat everything twice. He'd joked about buying a Corvette with his combat pay, even though he didn't have a license. Took a round to the chest before he ever saw one. Walt had dragged his body back to cover, laid him down gently behind a tree root wide as a car hood. There hadn't been time to bury him, just time to take his tags, close his eyes, and keep moving. He remembered the feeling of the chopper blades beating the jungle air when they finally came, like God himself had taken a breath. They rose out of the trees under fire, hot metal tearing through the canopy as they clung to the skids, bleeding, silent, exhausted. No one spoke until they touched down on the carrier deck. Even then, the words were few. A week later, a general whose name he couldn't recall pinned a medal on his chest and called him a hero. Walt barely remembered the ceremony. He'd kept the citation, folded neatly, stored in the back of his sea bag ever since. But he never wore the medal. It didn't belong to him. Not really. It belonged to Jimmy, to Alvarez, to Mason, to the boys who never made it out. Back at the bench, a car passed, bass thudding in its wake. Walt blinked once, the humid green fading into concrete grey. His fingers flexed slowly, as if still holding a rifle. The scent of mud, oil, and blood still lived somewhere deep in his mind, sealed tight like a steel box he'd never dare open all the way. He adjusted his cap. Nobody noticed. They never did. Colonel Jacob Rains eased his pickup into second gear, As he rounded the curve near Maple and Eighth Eyes, his uniform jacket still pressed and buttoned, despite the heat. The medals on his chest clinked faintly with each bump in the road, a sound he'd long ago learned to ignore. His tie felt tight. It always did after ceremonies. Too formal, too stiff, too many words about the dead from people who never held them as they bled out. He adjusted the rearview mirror. His reflection stared back, creased, weathered. Eyes that had seen war in 3 countries, and too many homecomings that ended in folded flags. There was a fresh white carnation in the passenger seat, still damp from the cemetery lawn. It had been a quiet ceremony this time. No bagpipes. Just a bell and silence. That was how he liked it. Anything else felt too loud. The truck rattled over a pothole and his gaze drifted, habitually scanning. The bus stop came into view, run down. Rust streaked along the metal frame, a splintered bench beneath it. He wasn't planning to stop, not until he saw the group, 5 of them, maybe 6, teenagers, clustered like vultures around a man who sat perfectly still. Raines's eyes narrowed. The man didn't flinch, didn't move, just sat with his hands resting on a faded duffel bag, a navy cap low on his brow, his posture too perfect for someone trying to be invisible. Raines slowed. Something about the scene itched at the back of his mind. He'd seen that kind of stillness before. Not the stillness of fear, but of patience, of discipline. A man trained to wait under fire, not to give the enemy the satisfaction of flinching. He eased the truck to the curb, engine idling low. One of the teens leaned in closer, holding up a phone, laughing. That did it. Raines threw it in park. He stepped out, boots hitting the pavement with a weight that turned a few heads. The air shifted. His uniform caught the morning light, ribbons gleaming in full color, combat action, meritorious service, Purple Heart. He adjusted his cover and shut the door softly behind him. The teenagers didn't notice him yet, too busy filming their next joke. Raines took one step forward, then another, and then he said, calmly, evenly, like he was still on a drill field, "Which one of you thinks mocking a veteran makes you a man?" Colonel Jacob Raines wasn't a man prone to sentiment. Years in uniform taught him to read a room, a street, a combat zone before he ever stepped into it. So when he turned onto Monroe and saw the kids first, clustered like jackals around the bench, his grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. They were laughing too loud, their movements too bold, the kind of mockery that needed an audience. He slowed. The man they surrounded didn't move, didn't even flinch. Something felt off. Not wrong, not dangerous, just off. The kind of thing you couldn't explain, only sense, like a mine that hadn't been tripped yet. Raines eased off the gas. His eyes narrowed. The old man on the bench, he had the look, not the disheveled shuffle of someone lost or confused. This was something else. The set of the shoulders, the square of the jaw, hands resting on a duffel like he knew exactly what was in it and exactly where it had been. The kind of stillness you only saw in men trained not to move unless it mattered. A kid leaned in with a phone, grinning. Another one tossed a chip wrapper at the old man's boots, laughing when it missed. Raines watched, engine idling. He could hear the voices now, taunting, immature, sharp-edged and empty. The man didn't respond. Not a glance, not a twitch. Just watched the road like he was waiting for a convoy. That's when it hit him. He'd seen that posture in combat zones, in bunkers, in barracks at 0300 when a mission was about to drop. Men who'd been through too much and had no time left for nonsense. Raines recognized the duffel bag, too. Standard issue from a time before zippers were fashionable. One of those things you kept long after the world had changed, because it held stories no one else could carry. Raines checked the mirror. No cars behind him, no one honking. Just the low hum of the city pretending not to notice. He put the truck in park. The kids didn't see him step out, didn't hear the door click shut or the scuffed boots hit pavement. But Rains was already moving, not fast, not loud, just with the kind of purpose that made the world pause. He adjusted his cover. His instincts had never failed him in uniform. They weren't about to start now. The truck jolted as Rains yanked the wheel hard to the right, tires thudding against the curb. He didn't bother easing it into a proper stop, just threw it in park halfway into the lane. Horns erupted behind him, sharp and impatient, the kind of noise city drivers made when their routines were interrupted. He didn't look back. A delivery van swerved around him, the driver yelling something out the window that faded behind the roar of his engine. Rains didn't care. His boots hit the asphalt with the solid finality of a man who'd stepped out of far worse. He left the door open, didn't take his eyes off the bench. The kids still hadn't noticed him. One had a phone raised, capturing another round of mockery. The old man, Jesus, he had to be in his 80s, sat as still as a stone, navy cap low, hands resting on a bag that had more years than most of those kids combined. There was history in that duffel. Rains could see it from 20 feet away. You didn't carry something that long unless it carried you back. The teen nearest to him did a mock march, saluting the sky, camera rolling. The others cracked up. One squatted in front of the bench, holding up his phone like it was a mirror. "Say cheese, Grandpa. Tell us about the dinosaurs." Rains was already crossing the street. No rush, no shout. But the way he moved, the straight back, the clean lines of his uniform, the calm weight in his stride, parted the moment like a blade. The laughter faltered. One of the boys lowered his phone. Another glanced at Rains, blinked twice, and nudged his friend. The street noise faded. Even the old man on the bench finally looked up, his gaze steady, unreadable. His expression didn't change, but something in his shoulders shifted, barely, but enough recognition. Rains stopped 5 feet from the group. The medals on his chest caught a shard of sun, just enough to make the youngest one squint. No one spoke. He took a breath, slow and deliberate, letting it sit there in the silence. Then, with the same low, steady tone he'd used briefing recruits before combat exercises, he said, "Which one of you thinks mocking a veteran makes you a man?" No answer. Only the sound of a city forgetting how to speak. Colonel Jacob Rains closed the door of his truck with the quiet finality of a man who had ended more than one conversation without saying a word. His dress blues caught the morning light, sharp creases, polished buttons, ribbons aligned with military precision. His boots struck the pavement like punctuation marks as he walked toward the bench. The boys saw him too late. One had just finished a mocking salute, twirling in place. Another was mid-sentence, saying something about World War Z. Their laughter hiccuped, then died, as they turned to see the man in uniform crossing the street without hurry, without hesitation. His eyes never left them. Rains stopped a few feet away. His presence carried the kind of weight you didn't measure in pounds, only in silence. His cover sat squarely on his head, his gaze leveled at the kid with the phone still in hand. The teen's grin flickered, then faltered. "Which one of you," Rains said, voice even and calm, "thinks mocking a veteran makes you a man?" It wasn't a question that expected an answer. He didn't need volume. Authority hung off every syllable like smoke from a lit match. The group shifted uncomfortably. The kid with the phone lowered it, suddenly unsure where to look. Rains turned slightly, his gaze sweeping across them. Slow, deliberate. He said nothing more. He didn't have to. The boys shuffled back a step. One muttered something under his breath, but it wasn't worth repeating. Walt Jennings, still seated, tilted his head slightly. His eyes met Rains's, calm and searching. Recognition passed between them, quiet, unspoken, born of years spent in places civilians couldn't pronounce. Walt gave the slightest of nods. Rains nodded back. He stepped closer to the bench, boots scraping softly on the sidewalk. The group had fully backed off now, their posture no longer amused, just uncertain. A few glances passed between them, like they were waiting for someone else to make the next move. No one did. Rains didn't look at them again. He stood beside the bench and removed his cover with quiet reverence, tucking it under his arm. "Permission to sit, Chief?" he asked. Walt's reply was a breath, nearly a whisper. "Granted." And so the colonel sat beside him, both men facing forward, the air around them suddenly heavier with meaning. Behind them, the kids drifted off. No more laughter, no more filming, just footsteps, awkward and retreating, lost in the sound of traffic and the low rustle of wind. No one moved. The street, once alive with laughter and motion, collapsed into silence as if the world had drawn in a breath and forgotten how to let it go. The boy with the phone slowly lowered it, thumb still hovering near the record button, unsure whether to hide the device or keep it as a shield. The smirk that had curled on his lips moments ago faded without protest. Next to him, another shuffled backward, glancing at his sneakers as though they might offer a way out. The girl in the yellow hoodie crossed her arms tightly, eyes darting from the colonel's ribbons to the old man's stillness. She looked like she suddenly wished to be anywhere else. None of them spoke. Colonel Rains didn't blink. He didn't shout or raise a finger. He just stood, calm and upright, as if his presence alone were enough to rewrite the moment. And it was. The uniform didn't need to be explained, not when worn like that, not by a man who carried silence like a weapon. Walt Jennings hadn't turned his head. Not yet. He still looked forward, his gaze fixed on the empty street ahead, as if none of it, none of the noise, the disrespect, the audience, had ever been worth his time. But his fingers eased off the strap of the duffel bag, just slightly. The tension that had curled into his shoulders, invisible to most, softened beneath the stillness surrounding them now. The wind stirred a bit of dust across the sidewalk. A car rolled by, its engine a low whisper compared to the absence it passed through. Inside the little bubble of space near the bench, the world felt carved out, like a scene cut from a different era, when men wore silence like armor, and respect wasn't earned with likes but by scars that didn't show. The colonel took a single step forward. The boys instinctively stepped back. One of them started to speak, but the words got caught somewhere between throat and pride, and he gave up before sound ever left his lips. Another reached for the girl's arm, and she flinched, not from fear, but something colder. Shame. Rains finally let his gaze sweep over them, 1 second for each face, like reading a report he already knew the outcome of. Then quietly, like punctuation at the end of a sentence no one wanted to hear, he said, "Not one of you asked his name." The boy with the phone swallowed hard, and the silence deepened. Rains stood beside the bench like a statue carved from uniform and memory. The street behind him murmured faintly, an engine revving, a dog barking somewhere distant. But in the circle of concrete and stillness around that bus stop, time paused. Walt Jennings hadn't moved, not since the colonel arrived. His eyes, sharp despite their age, stayed fixed on the road ahead, as if measuring the distance to something no one else could see. Rains adjusted his cover. A heartbeat passed. Then, in a single, deliberate motion, he brought his hand to his brow and held it there, fingers straight, palm angled perfectly. A salute not made from ceremony, but from something older, deeper. A salute that said, "I know who you are." "Permission to speak, Chief Petty Officer Jennings," the colonel said, voice low, firm, and laced with respect. The stillness cracked. Walt blinked slowly, turned his head, their eyes met, gray to gray, storm to storm. For the first time in hours, maybe in days, a flicker of something passed across Walt's face. Not surprise, not pride, recognition. Like seeing a photograph from a war only the two of them remembered. He gave a small nod, the kind a man makes when no words are needed. "Permission granted," he said, voice rasped by time, quiet as gravel under boots. Rains lowered his hand with the same precision, then sat beside him without another word. They didn't speak right away, didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was earned. The kind of silence men shared after surviving things the world didn't put in textbooks. Across the street, the last of the kids had drifted away. No more phones, no more laughter. The air held only the soft buzz of power lines and the hush of a breeze that seemed to respect the moment. Rains looked forward, mirroring Walt's posture. "I remember you from training," he said finally. "Coronado, 78. You ran us through drown-proofing, damn near killed half the class." Walt gave a slow exhale that might have been a chuckle. "Should have killed more," he said. Rains smiled, the faintest tilt of the mouth. "You taught me what stillness was," the colonel said, "what waiting meant. We thought you were a ghost back then, never raised your voice, never blinked. We figured out later you didn't need to." Walt didn't respond, but he nodded again. Two old men, a bench, a silence full of decades, and for once, the world around them listened. The silence held for a long moment, the kind that didn't press or expect, just existed, as if the world had agreed to give two men a little room. Colonel Rains looked down at his gloves, turning them once between his fingers, then set them on his knee like he was setting down something sacred. "I remember the name before I remembered the face," he said, voice low and steady. "Jennings, Chief Petty Officer Walter Jennings, SEAL Team 2. Multiple combat tours, Vietnam, Gulf, Somalia, Bronze Star with valor, one of the few who came home carrying more ghosts than medals." He didn't look at Walt as he spoke. He looked ahead, as if reading from a page only he could see. "You trained 2 generations of special warfare operatives, some of the best this country ever produced, men who swore your name was legend. Half of them didn't believe you were real. You were the guy who could go 12 days in the jungle without needing a resupply, the one who dragged his entire squad through a monsoon with 2 bullets in your leg and a broken radio, the man who once held a perimeter solo for 22 hours because evac was late and no one else survived the hit." He paused, eyes narrowing on the far end of the street, not really seeing it. "They called you Ghost Walker," Rains added, almost as an afterthought. "You were the first to enter and the last to leave, always quiet, always alone." Walt said nothing. He didn't deny it, didn't confirm it either. His hands stayed folded in his lap, fingers weathered and still. The duffel bag at his feet hadn't moved. Rains nodded once, more to himself than anyone else. "And after all that, after decades of service, after all the places this country asked you to bleed in, you came back here, small town, single-story home, built a life with Clara, raised no kids, but helped raise the whole block." His voice softened. "After she passed, you could have locked the world out. No one would have blamed you, but you didn't. You built ramps for wounded vets, taught GED classes at the community center, drove groceries to the senior home every Wednesday, never asked for thanks, never expected it." Another silence settled between them. Then Rains glanced sideways, his voice almost a whisper. "The funny thing is, these kids think they caught you at your weakest," Walt finally spoke, eyes forward. "They caught me at peace." Rains nodded slowly and said nothing more. It started with one man, grey polo, khakis, a coffee in one hand and keys in the other. He slowed when he saw the colonel in uniform, seated beside the old man on the bench, both of them silent, unmoving. Something about it didn't sit right with him. Maybe it was the stillness. Maybe it was the look on the old man's face. He stopped walking, watched, didn't say a word. A woman pushing a stroller followed, then a teenager on a bike. The traffic light at the corner turned red, and a car window rolled down. The driver stared. Across the street, someone exited the pharmacy and paused mid-step. Another pulled out their phone, holding it like a shield between curiosity and reverence. By the time the second minute passed, 10 people had gathered. "What's going on?" someone whispered. "Who's that? Is that a general?" "No," said a voice from behind them. "That's a colonel. But the man beside him, he's someone." No one knew exactly what they were watching. They only knew it wasn't ordinary. A teenage girl stepped forward, camera rolling, narrating quietly. "There's an old man at the bus stop with a military officer sitting next to him. They're not saying anything, but—" Her voice trailed off as her lens focused on Walt's face, weathered, unreadable, but carrying something heavy. The first man finally spoke, mostly to himself. "I think I've seen him before, at the VFW post. Never talked much." Another nodded. "He helped my uncle after his surgery. Built him a ramp. Wouldn't take money." The air shifted. A boy in a hoodie asked, "Wait, is that the guy who teaches night classes down at the rec center?" Someone else added, "He fixed my mom's fence after that storm last year." Names began to form. Not full names, just fragments. "Walt, Mr. Jennings, the Navy guy." People pointed, murmured. The crowd swelled. 15, 20, maybe more. A few phones were still up, but no one was laughing now. They weren't watching for drama. They were waiting for meaning. On the bench, Walt hadn't moved. The colonel didn't flinch. They were just two men in a sea of questions, answering none, demanding nothing. The woman with the stroller reached into the canopy and adjusted her baby's blanket. She looked at Walt, then at the others. "My husband said he never missed a blood drive. 30 years straight. Rain or shine." Another voice called out gently. "He fixed my brakes once. Charged me $5. Said it was for the wrench." Someone sniffed. A man in a suit removed his sunglasses, quietly slipping them into his pocket. No one clapped. No one cheered. They just stood, quiet now, as if the ground beneath the bench had become something sacred, and the street, for the first time in a long time, listened. The boy in the red hoodie chuckled, sharp, awkward, like a balloon deflating too fast. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other and waved his phone. "Relax, man. It was just a joke. We didn't mean anything by it." Colonel Rains didn't move. He remained seated beside Walt, boots flat on the concrete, hands folded over his knee. His gaze, however, rose slowly, locking onto the boy with the calm steadiness of a man who had once held enemy eyes through a sniper scope. The boy's voice wavered. Rains didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Tell me what you've done for your country." The words dropped like iron into water. The teen blinked. Nothing really, I guess. But I'm just a kid, man. It's not like—" "Exactly," Rains said, tone cool and even. "You've done nothing, and that's fine. You're young, you have time. But here's what's not fine, standing in front of a man who's done everything and laughing." The boy opened his mouth, but no words came. "You think he's just some guy on a bench," Rains continued. "You don't see the years he carried on his back, the places he bled for people he never met. You didn't ask his name. You didn't look at his hands, scarred, calloused, steady. You looked at his cap and thought old instead of earned. That's not ignorance, that's laziness." The kid's jaw tightened, but his eyes were glassy now, full of confusion and something colder, shame. "You carry a phone." "He carried bodies," Rains added. "You filmed strangers. He rescued friends. You mocked him for sitting still." Silence stretched again, taut and crackling. Walt didn't look at the boy. He didn't need to. Rains leaned back slightly, still watching the teen, not with anger, but with the kind of disappointment that reaches deeper. "You're not a bad kid," Rains said. "But if you walk away from this and forget it, then you're just another bystander in a world already full of them." The teen stared at the pavement. His phone hung loose in his hand now, forgotten. One of his friends mumbled something and started to backpedal, but the boy didn't move. He just stood there, stuck in the quiet, as if rooted to the spot by something heavier than guilt. Rains turned his gaze back to the street. The moment had passed, but the boy would remember. Walt Jennings shifted slightly, the old bench creaking beneath him like a ship's hull in shallow water. The wind had picked up, tugging gently at the edges of his coat, fluttering the hem just enough to stir the dust at his boots. He let the silence breathe for a moment longer, then turned his head, slowly, deliberately, toward the cluster of teenagers still standing awkwardly on the sidewalk. His voice, when it came, was low, rough, not weak, weathered, like a storm-worn deck that still held underfoot. "You know, I've buried men younger than you." The words were simple, not meant to wound, just the truth, heavy and unadorned. One of the boys opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I don't say that to scare you," Walt continued, eyes narrowing slightly, not in judgment but memory. "I say it because those men, those boys, they never got the chance to grow old. Never got to stand on a street corner and laugh at something stupid. Never got to hold a child, or say they were sorry, or learn that silence isn't the same as weakness." He looked out at the street again, eyes distant. "We used to carry our brothers when they couldn't walk. We'd take their weight, sometimes what was left of them. We didn't do it for medals. We did it because the man next to you matters more than the noise inside your own head." The girl in the yellow hoodie wiped her cheek without realizing it. "You want to be tough?" Walt asked. "Then show up when no one's watching. Fix something that isn't yours to fix. Listen more than you speak, and when someone older, slower, maybe a little broken sits beside you, don't look through them. Look at them." He reached down, ran his fingers across the faded duffel, his touch light, reverent. "This bag's seen things. I've seen things, but I'd trade every damn medal I ever earned to bring back one scared kid who didn't make it home." He looked at them then, really looked. And for a moment, none of them looked away. You don't have to wear a uniform to live with honor. You just have to remember that the world isn't about you. It never was. A beat passed. Then he leaned back, hands folded again. "You'll forget what I said," he added, softer now. "But one day, you'll meet someone who reminds you. And when you do, don't laugh. Listen." He said no more. The silence returned, but this time it meant something. The cruiser rolled up slow, its tires crackling over gravel, light bar flickering half-heartedly in the morning sun. The kind of arrival meant to control a scene without making a scene. A local patrol unit, young probably, backup called in by someone who saw too many people standing still in a city that preferred movement. The doors didn't open at first. The crowd, now 24 strong, shifted. Phones lowered, voices hushed. Even the breeze seemed to pause. Walt didn't move. Rains didn't either. Finally, the driver's door creaked open, and a young officer stepped out, tall, square-shouldered, barely older than the kids who had been laughing an hour ago. His sunglasses mirrored the crowd. His hand rested near the holster, not from fear but habit. He took 3 steps, then froze. Recognition landed like a weight. Colonel Jacob Rains, full-dress blues, sitting beside the most immovable man in town, Walt Jennings. The officer removed his sunglasses. A second door opened. His partner stepped out, shorter, nervous. He scanned the faces, caught the stiffness in the crowd, and whispered, "What happened here?" The first officer didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked on Walt, and something in his posture softened, not out of weakness, but memory. He'd seen Walt once before, not in uniform, not giving orders, just quiet, repairing a fence for a widow on Monroe Street. No charge, no fuss, just the work. Now here he sat, beside a colonel, in front of a crowd that had begun with mockery and ended in silence. The officer stepped forward, slower this time. "Sir," he said, looking at Rains. "We got a call about a disturbance. Thought it might have been a fight or protest. Didn't realize it was—" He glanced at Walt, then cleared his throat. "A misunderstanding." Rains didn't rise. He didn't need to. "No disturbance here, officer," he said evenly. "Just a man waiting for a bus, and a few kids learning something they should have been taught years ago." The officer nodded. His voice lowered. "I didn't know it was him." "You should have," Rains replied, eyes steady. Silence followed. Not cold, not hostile, just the truth sitting there between them like a stone. The officer turned slightly, nodding to his partner. "We're good here." He stepped back. No citations. No questions. Walt looked up, not at the officers, but at the horizon again. The world hadn't changed, but maybe, just maybe, a few people had. The cruiser didn't linger. The engine turned over, lights off, radio silent. As it pulled away, the reflection in the side mirror showed the same old man on the same old bench, but this time no one looked through him. They looked at him. The cruiser circled the block once before pulling up again, this time slower, more deliberate. The officer, same one from earlier, stepped out alone, his partner remaining inside, eyes forward, hands tight on the wheel. The young man looked different now, shoulders a little lower, confidence dimmed by the weight of recognition. Walt still sat on the bench, calm, unmoved. The duffel rested beside him like always. Colonel Rains had stood and taken a few steps away, giving them space without being asked. The officer cleared his throat softly. "Sir," he said, voice quieter than before, "I wanted to apologize." Walt didn't speak, just waited. I saw what was happening earlier," the officer went on, eyes on the sidewalk. "Heard the laughing, the way they treated you. I should have stepped in, should have done something." Walt looked at him, not hard, not angry, just looked, and let the silence do what words couldn't. The officer shifted awkwardly. "I didn't know who you were," he said. "I know that doesn't excuse anything, but it's the truth." Walt nodded once. "Doesn't matter who I am," he said. "Matters who they thought I wasn't." The words hit harder than any raised voice could have. "I've got no excuse," the officer said, "and I'm not going to stand here and try to explain away what I didn't do." He took a breath, then added, "I'd be honored to give you a ride, sir. Anywhere you're going. Bus won't be here for a while." Walt glanced at the road, then back to the cruiser. The engine idled patiently. For a moment, it looked like he might consider it, but he shook his head. "Appreciate it," he said. "But I've got a few more things to think about before I get where I'm going." The officer looked like he wanted to insist, but thought better of it. Instead, he extended his hand. Walt hesitated, then stood, slowly, stiffly, but on his own. They shook. Not long, just enough. "Take care of this town," Walt said. "Doesn't always know how to take care of itself." The officer nodded, swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." Walt sat again as the cruiser pulled away, the officer looking once more in the rearview mirror at the man on the bench, the man he hadn't seen soon enough. Rains returned without a word, taking his seat beside Walt once more. And for a long moment, neither man said a thing. The bus groaned to a stop 10 minutes late, its brakes hissing like it had something to say. Walt stood slow, one hand gripping the arm of the bench, the other clutching his duffel. Colonel Rains moved to help, but Walt waved him off with a quiet glance that said he'd stood up under worse. They shook hands, short, firm, nothing performative. Rains didn't offer another salute. Some things you only do once when they're meant to last. Walt stepped onto the bus, dropped a few crumpled bills in the fare box, and took a seat near the front, duffel tucked between his boots. The driver nodded, recognition flickering there, and said, "Morning, Mr. Jennings." Walt gave a quiet, "Mornin'," back. 2 stops later, he pulled the cord and stepped out in front of the Franklin Community Center. No sign, no fanfare, just a squat, red brick building with peeling paint and a flag that hung slightly crooked in the breeze. He walked through the front doors, where a volunteer at the desk smiled. "Hey, Walt, they're already in room 3. Paul brought donuts. Said something about bribing you for an extension." Walt gave a soft grunt of amusement and kept walking. The hallway smelled like whiteboard markers and floor wax. On the walls hung faded flyers, PTSD support, food drives, an old notice for free winter coats. He passed them all, boots thudding softly on the linoleum, and pushed open the door to room 3. Inside, 7 men sat at folding tables. A few were rough around the edges, sleeves rolled up, tattoos faded, hands that twitched like they weren't used to being still. One wore a Department of Corrections sweatshirt, another had a service dog curled under the desk. They all straightened when Walt entered. Not military straight, but close enough. "You're late," one of them said, grinning. Walt dropped his bag by the chalkboard and looked around the room. "No," he replied. "Bus was late. I was early where it mattered." That drew a few chuckles. He picked up a marker and turned to the board, scrawling the words compound sentences in block letters. Behind him, chairs shifted. Coffee was sipped. Someone cursed under his breath at a dropped pencil. Walt didn't mind. These weren't students, not in the traditional sense. They were fighters, survivors, trying to rebuild in a world that didn't always forgive. This was why he came. Not for applause, not for recognition, but because some missions don't end when the war does. The crowd had thinned, as crowds always do, attention spans scattered by the next thing, the next noise, the next notification. But one boy lingered. He stood at the edge of the sidewalk, hands buried deep in the pocket of his hoodie, hood drawn low as if it could shield him from what he was feeling. He watched as Walt adjusted the strap on his duffel, the movement slow but sure, deliberate. The old man didn't say goodbye to the colonel. He just gave a nod, like men who've already said what needed saying. The teen took a hesitant step forward. Walt noticed him, of course, not with surprise. Just a small glance, a quiet acknowledgement. He didn't stop walking. The boy fell into step beside him. They crossed the street without speaking. The only sound between them, the uneven rhythm of their footsteps and the occasional creak of a duffel that had seen too many roads. Cars passed. A dog barked 2 blocks away. But in that sliver of time, the city might as well have been silent. At the curb, Walt paused, eyeing the bench again, not for the seat. Just out of habit, surveying the space, noting the exits, the angles, the edges. You never really stop doing that. The boy reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone. For a moment he hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. Then he held it out, screen lit. Camera roll still open. Walt didn't move. The kid tapped a video file. The one from earlier, the laughter, the mock salute, the smug angle. He watched it play for 2 seconds, then stopped it, hit delete. Confirmed it, the screen went black. He handed the phone to Walt, not as a gift, not as an offering, just as a gesture. Walt took it, stared at the blank screen, then handed it back. No words. The boy took a step back, nodded once. "I didn't know," he said, voice low, unsteady. "I didn't think." Walt looked at him, not with judgment, not with pity, just long enough to make the boy feel the weight of his own voice. "Now you do," Walt said. The bus hissed to a stop behind them, doors folding open with a sigh. The kid didn't follow. He just stood there, hands in his pockets again, as Walt stepped aboard. No photos, no posts, just silence and the sound of a lesson that had finally found a place to land. Rains waited until the bus groaned away in a plume of white exhaust and diesel breath. Walt hadn't boarded, just stood there, hands buried in his coat pockets, duffel at his feet like it was welded there. His eyes followed the bus as it disappeared down the street, not with regret, just quiet consideration, like a man who had never rushed for anything unless it was bleeding. Rains stepped closer, thumb hooked on his belt. "Can I give you a lift, Chief?" Walt looked over, not surprised, not grateful, just present. "You still drive that beat-up Silverado?" he asked, voice dry. "Repainted it. Still runs like hell." Rains managed half a grin. "But it doesn't stall on hills anymore." Walt's face twitched, close enough to a smile to count. "Guess that's an improvement." Rains bent down, picked up the duffel, and slung it gently into the truck bed. He didn't ask again. Walt followed without a word, climbed into the passenger seat with the practiced ease of someone who'd once ridden in Blackhawks with torn ligaments and bad intel. They drove in silence for the first few blocks. The road was mostly empty now, just wind and open sky. Rains kept both hands on the wheel, knuckles loose. He didn't bother with music. Men like them had their own noise. "I heard about Clark," Walt said finally. Rains nodded. "Pancreatic cancer. Went fast. Didn't suffer much. He used to say he wanted to go out in a firefight. Or asleep." Walt looked out the window. "Guess the universe compromised." They both chuckled softly. "Remember that op in Kandahar?" Rains asked. "The goat barn with the RPGs stashed in a haystack?" Walt nodded. "You were still a captain, green as mint gum. And you were yelling at me in whispers." "Wasn't yelling," Walt muttered. "You just had bad ears." Rains smiled, the kind that doesn't show teeth. "I should have listened more. To all of you." Walt didn't respond. He didn't have to. They drove past a grocery store, a schoolyard, a shuttered mechanic's shop. Walt's eyes scanned each like they were part of a mission map. Every landmark had a weight. "I miss the quiet," Rains said after a while. Walt tilted his head. "This seems quiet to me." "I mean the other kind. The kind you only get when everything's over, but your heart hasn't caught up yet." Walt gave a slow nod. "Yeah, I know that one." The truck turned onto a narrow side road. Rains didn't ask for directions. He already knew where Walt lived. As the tires crunched up the gravel driveway, Rains finally said, "You ever need a ride, Walt? Doesn't matter where, doesn't matter when." Walt looked at him. Not with thanks, with trust. "I know," he said, and that was the end of it. Act V. Legacy and Change. The first post was simple. Shaky footage taken from across the street. A woman in scrubs, just off her shift, had paused long enough to film the moment when Colonel Rains snapped into a salute, and the old man on the bench returned it without missing a beat. She uploaded it with 6 words. "Colonel salutes bus stop vet." Wow! No hashtags, no filters, just a moment. Within an hour, it had 400 shares. By noon, it was 20,000. By the end of the day, it had gone viral. Someone on Twitter reposted it with a caption, "This is what respect looks like." That one hit 1 million in less than 12 hours. On Reddit, the front page lit up with a still frame, 2 men, motionless, heads held high. Beneath it, 1,000 comments bloomed overnight. Veterans wrote long paragraphs. Teens confessed they'd shown the video to their dads. A few asked if the man on the bench was still alive. They didn't know his name yet, but they would. Someone local recognized the bus stop, then the street, then the man. A commenter from the neighborhood wrote, "That's Walt Jennings. He built my mum's wheelchair ramp after her stroke. Wouldn't take a dime." Another added, "He teaches my brother's GED class. Never raises his voice, just listens." It snowballed from there. Photos emerged, grainy, humble snapshots of Walt fixing porch steps, unloading crates of canned food, standing at the back of VFW meetings with a coffee in hand. No interviews, no speeches, just a man quietly showing up. News outlets picked it up, local first, then national. Anchors spoke his name like it had weight. Walt Jennings, 81, Navy veteran, decorated, disrespected, then honored. The video looped endlessly. The colonel stepping forward, the teens backing off, the bench, the salute. Always the salute. That moment became the story people didn't know they needed. No arguments, no politics. Just a gesture that meant more because nothing else was said. By morning, the town was buzzing. Strangers left folded notes on Walt's porch. One woman tied a red ribbon around the bench. A florist sent a dozen sunflowers with a card that read, "Thank you for waiting." Walt didn't say much when Rains called to tell him, just grunted and said, "Figures, internet's got nothing better to do." But later that night, he sat on the porch a little longer than usual, not waiting for anything, not expecting applause, just sitting steady and silent, and for once, the world leaned in. The mayor's assistant called 3 times before Walt answered. Even then, it was a brief exchange. She spoke quickly, listing names of local officials, veterans groups, and a brass band that had apparently already confirmed. Walt said little. When she asked if he'd wear his medals, there was a long pause before he said, "I'll bring the jacket, don't expect speeches." That Saturday, the town square filled in slow, respectful waves. Folding chairs were arranged in careful rows. A podium stood near the flagpole. Banners hung above, though Walt winced when he saw one that read, "Hero at the bus stop." He arrived early, naturally, wore the same faded navy jacket he'd had since '82. The fit was snug across the shoulders now. Clara had once patched the inside lining by hand, and he'd never replaced it. The medals were there, pinned without flourish. Bronze Star, Navy Commendation, 3 campaign ribbons. He didn't smile when people applauded. He just nodded. The ceremony began with formalities, introductions, a prayer, the anthem. The mayor read from a paper, calling Walt a quiet foundation beneath our city, her voice wavering as she tried to hold back tears that hadn't been rehearsed. Someone from the crowd shouted, "We love you, Mr. Jennings," and the people clapped not like at a parade, but like a funeral, soft, solemn, real. Walt took the stage when asked, slow but steady, each step measured. He stood behind the podium without adjusting the microphone, hands behind his back. For a moment, he looked like he might say nothing at all. Then, "I don't need a statue." He let that settle. No need for parades, or plaques, or fancy words. He paused, glancing at the small crowd. "I just want folks to take care of each other, build something useful." He pulled a folded paper from his breast pocket. It was a single sentence. He read it without fanfare. "If anyone here wants to honor me, don't send flowers. Send money to the community center. They need new chairs and a water heater." A murmur rippled through the crowd, then laughter, gentle, warm, healing. He stepped away before anyone could ask questions. By nightfall, the donation box overflowed. Someone launched a fundraiser online. It reached 5,000 in the first hour. By Sunday, they'd passed 20. Walt didn't stay for cake, didn't linger for photos. He walked home alone, the same pace as always, duffel bag slung over one shoulder. On the bench where it all began, someone had placed a single white carnation. No name, no note, just a gesture, and that was enough. The room was half lit, just the way Walt liked it. Fluorescents buzzed faintly overhead, one flickering near the back, ignored like an old friend with a nervous tick. The tables were scratched and mismatched. The chairs wobbled if you leaned too far, and the whiteboard hadn't been properly white in 5 years. But this was his space, his post. 7 students sat scattered across the room, men and women who'd lived hard lives and carried the kind of silence that didn't come from shyness, but from having too much to say, and no one who'd ever asked. Ex-cons, single parents, combat vets, people used to doors closing. Walt stood at the front, chalk dust on his palms. His voice wasn't loud, it never had to be. He'd just finished a lesson on compound sentences, the same one he'd taught 100 times before, but this time his words lingered, slower, heavier. He looked at them, really looked, and said, "Last one for me." There was a pause. One of the students, a guy named Jalen, big heart, broken past, shifted in his seat. "You mean for the semester?" "No," Walt said. "I mean last one. I'm hanging it up." The room stayed quiet. No one knew what to say. These were people used to people leaving, but not like this. Not with warning, not gently. Walt reached for the board, started wiping it down with the rag he kept folded in the back of his binder. He didn't say anything more. Then a voice at the back, soft, from Marlene, who never spoke unless it mattered. "We got you something." He turned, brow raised. Jalen walked forward, a square object wrapped in brown paper and tape. He held it out with both hands like a folded flag. Walt took it slowly, unwrapped the corners, and stared down at the simple wooden plaque. Burned into the grain were 12 words. "To the man who taught us to stand tall, thank you." For a long moment, he didn't speak. He just ran his fingers over the edge, then nodded once, firm and quiet. The kind of nod that said more than most speeches. "I didn't teach you much," he finally said. "Just reminded you what you already had in you." Jalen sniffed. Marlene wiped her cheek. Walt placed the plaque back into its paper wrapping, held it close. "Take care of each other," he said. Then he walked out of the room without a backward glance, duffel over his shoulder, leaving behind a silence that was full, not empty. And they let him go. Just like that. No applause, no fanfare, just respect. The letter came in an envelope that looked like it had already survived a few skirmishes. Scuffed edges, smudged ink, a crease across the middle like it had been folded too tightly by nervous hands. The return address was scrawled in blocky, uncertain handwriting, PFC Brandon Keller, USMC. Walt read it on the porch, the wood beneath his chair warm from the late afternoon sun. The duffel bag, long retired from travel, sat beside him like always. He didn't tear the envelope open, just ran his thumb over the edge for a moment, the way a man might trace the seam of an old wound. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no fluff, no printed letterhead, just plain lined notebook paper. Words pressed hard enough to indent through the back. "Mr. Jennings, I don't expect you to remember me. I was one of the punks at the bus stop. The loud one. The stupid one. The one with the phone. I enlisted 6 months later. I wasn't sure why at first. Thought maybe I was trying to run from something, but boot camp stripped that away quick. Somewhere between the 5 a.m. wake-ups and the sandpit crawls. I figured it out. I wasn't running. I was answering something. That day at the bench, when you didn't say anything, when you just sat there and let me make a fool of myself, I didn't get it. Not right away, but it stuck with me. The way you held your ground without lifting a finger. The way the colonel looked at you, the way everyone did. Once they knew, I needed that wake-up call. I needed to learn that real strength isn't loud. It doesn't beg to be noticed. It just is. I'm writing because we had a lesson last week on leadership and legacy. They asked us to name someone we respected, someone who shaped us. Some guys wrote about their dads, some named their drill sergeant. I wrote your name, then I told them the story. They listened. Even the staff sergeant, thank you. Not for the speech you didn't give, but for the example you didn't stop being. Semper Fi, PFC Brandon Keller. Walt read it twice, then folded the paper slowly, creasing it with the same precision he once used to fold maps in a jungle. He didn't say anything aloud, just leaned back in the chair, letter resting against his chest, eyes half closed as the breeze moved through the porch rails. A boy had mocked him once. Now a man had thanked him, full circle. The bench was quieter now. No footsteps, no laughter, no one pretending not to see the old man who used to sit there, hands resting on a faded duffel, eyes trained on something just beyond the horizon. The rusted shelter had been painted since then, the cracks in the pavement sealed. Even the squeaky sign above the route number had been replaced, though it still read Route 42, the one Walt never stopped waiting for, even when he had nowhere in particular to go. They didn't hold a ceremony for this one. No podium, no brass band, no speeches. Just a quiet morning, just after the fog lifted, and a few men from the city came with tools and steady hands. One brought a small bronze plaque, another brought a broom. No one spoke much, but when they were done, they stepped back and nodded to each other, the way workers do when they finish something worth leaving behind. The cap had been placed there the day after Walt passed. Faded navy, the gold stitching nearly threadbare. It hadn't moved since, not even when the wind picked up last week and scattered leaves all over the sidewalk. A woman walking her dog swore she saw a feather land on the brim and stay there, just for a moment, like it knew not to linger too long. The plaque was simple, mounted on the backrest. This was his post. He stood watch, even when seated. They didn't need to say more. The kids who used to pass by without noticing now stopped for a second look. A few sat down beside the cap, like it might speak if given time. One of them, tall, thin, always with headphones, started bringing a small bundle of flowers every Friday, wrapped in butcher paper. No note. At the community center, his name lived on a door. The Jennings Room, Adult Education and Veteran Outreach. Inside were books, coffee-stained desks, a cracked whiteboard, exactly how he would have left it. And the Harold Jennings Initiative, what began with one fundraiser, had turned into 3 wheelchair ramps, 2 rebuilt porches, and one vet finally getting his high school diploma at 61. But it was the bench that held him best. Even now, in the lull between buses, in the hush of midday traffic, people felt it, the stillness, the weight of presence that hadn't left, like the air itself remembered. Not everyone saw it. But those who did stood a little straighter as they passed, and no one ever sat in the middle anymore. That space belonged to him.